Good morning, Miss Diane Arbus, and thank you for accepting giving us this interview. So, why don't we talk about a little bit about who you are?
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. So, I was a photographer from the 20th century. I was born in New York City in 1923, but I committed suicide in 1971.
Okay then. Uh, well, if it wasn't clear, this is a very exclusive interview with Diane Arbus, and it's a privilege to have such an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, actually, it is. I don't really come back every day to give an interview. So, as a photographer, I like to take pictures of groups that were often marginalized. I worked with a lot of people, from strippers to carnival performers, and dwarfs and nudists, and even middle class families.
Well, then, now that we have this overview of your work, let's start by talking a little bit about your childhood. Your parents were from Russia, right?
Yeah, that's right. Their names were David and Gertrude Nemirov, Jewish immigrants from Soviet Russia. So here in the United States, they owned Russex, which is a department store on the Fifth Avenue. Yeah, I mean, this meant the Great Depression didn't affect them as much as it did others.
Why did you say the Great Depression didn't affect them instead of us?
Oh, it must have slipped out. So I usually don't think of myself in the context of my childhood. I parted with that way of life a long time ago. So my mother was clinically depressed, being admitted at one point. My father was always busy working at Rossex. And I think the sort of luxury I found in that period of my life wasn't part of my life later on.
Let's move on to your marriage. Your husband's name was Alan Arbus, is that correct?
Yes, but actually, he was my ex husband.
Yes, sorry. So, can you tell us a little bit about him?
So I met Alan when I was very young, around 14 or so, and we got married when I was 18. 4 years later, we had our firstborn Dune, and she later became a writer. And 19 years later, we had Amy, and she became a photographer just like her parents.
Let us talk about your photography career then. When did you first come into contact with photography and how did you take it up?
So I always saw that photographers used to take pictures from beautiful people and wonderful places, but no one had ever photographed the different. So I wanted to give those people a place in our society. So I started taking pictures from the different. And people always say that I only take weird pictures, but I don't think that's true.
And what point were you trying to make by photographing these people?
I guess what I was trying to do was to break this whole idealization of people and photography. And I didn't try to romanticize and bring compassion to my pictures. What I really wanted was for people to normalize the different and accept it and, I mean, respect it.
Now, being a little bit more technical, what made you decide to go from a 35 millimeters Nikon into a twin lens reflex Rolleiflex?
In the beginning of photography, I really like to make grainy things, and I'd be fascinated by what the grain did, and because it would make kind of a tapestry with all these little dots. But when I'd be working for a while with all these dots, um, I suddenly wanted terribly to get through it.
Now that we have summarized the highlights of your life and your career, I wanted to show you a short video made on one of your most popular photographs, the identical twins. I don't know if there's Wi-Fi wherever you live. I mean, wherever you inhabit in your afterlife. But one interesting thing about this video is that it also talks a little about some characteristics of your work in general apply to this specific case?
Well, now I'm curious. I don't think I have ever seen it before, so I'm kind of anxious about it.
This is a photograph taken by Diane Arbus in 1967 of two identical twins at a Christmas party, which was specifically set up for twins and triplets. It was taken in Rossell, New Jersey, and nobody really knows how Diane Arbus found this party, but of course she was always looking for the outside, the sort of other, unusual kind of image. Her sort of point of view was very much to keep the subject as it was and rather rearrange herself. In this particular image, identical twins, it's almost as though she subverts what we assume, because we assume that they are actually identical. But when we really look, we can see that they have their own personalities. You know, there's a slight different way they are holding themselves, tension in their hands, and actually the dresses they're wearing are green corduroy. So it's about switching the known and unknown and making the familiar almost unfamiliar and vice versa. I wouldn't like to consider Arbus really in a particular pigeonhole, if you like. You know, we have all these terms of genres, documentary, humanist, etc. But I think what she did was really document encounters. And the encounter was, you know, part of her. It was a visceral relationship between her and the subject. And I think what else she does finally is use the camera as a sort of key to unlock. And she unlocks her emotion towards the subject and vice versa, and therefore she manages to sort of transcend what we expect from the visual portrait.
Oh my god, the video is just amazing. I loved it. Thank you so much for showing me.
We're glad you liked it. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for joining us. We hope you have an amazing afterlife.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. So, photographing people in their homes is something I did very frequently. And so, this image of a Jewish giant with his parents demonstrates a moment of interaction which is both humorous, due to the mother and father having to look up to speak to their son, but at the same time, it's sensitive. And the vignette created by the dark edges of the image seems to freeze the moment in time, as though we are peering into a storybook. And I really think that this makes the image feel like very familiar and normal, but at the same time sensational. Okay, so this photograph of a female bartender is composed like most portraits. The woman sits elegantly in her chair, not stiff but clearly posing. And the traditional aesthetic of the portrait photograph is subverted by the pudo ornament placed on the opposite side of the frame. The pudo is proportionally the same size as the woman's hair. I merely picked up a joyful, quirky detail which asks us to reevaluate our initial impressions of the subject, and this reflects the gap between intention and effect. So the hyper definition picks up every tattoo, hair, and wrinkle of the man while retaining the grain of the film. The clarity lends itself well to the intense expression on the man's face, enhanced by his pale irises and the closeness of the shot. And And by focusing solely on the man and letting the carnival in the background almost entirely disappear, we are confronted with him as a powerful individual rather than as a circus performer. And here, basically, what I was trying to explain was my transition from love of grain to love of clarity.